So we're here at Natural Dam, Arkansas, and this is Natural Dam. As we can see, William T. Lawrence encountered the falls here in about 1819. He admired the natural beauty of the dam and decided to build a grist mill near this spot. He had the mill wheel delivered by steamboat to Van Buren. 3 teams of oxen pulled the wheel up the mountain to Natural Dam. And as we face the dam, to the left, there's supposed to be some triangular rocks that were probably used as the foundation for the mill. This is kind of faded out. It's hard to see the pictures. Soon other pioneers settled around the dam. It says note how old the structure looked in 1906. I can barely see the picture, but there's some people on horses. A store and post office were also opened here in 1838. Old foundation stones are still visible to the left side of the photograph, which is over this way. Mr. Lattimore also established a church camp nearby the dam. Families from up to 50 miles away would gather for the week-long meeting. Services often lasted late into the night. The flickering of the pine knot fire as it was stirred by the night breeze caused the trees shed and mass of beams swaying to and fro under an apparently invisible feeling to give the picture a weird and unnatural appearance. So yeah, there a lot of mysteriously and spiritually going on around here. We're gonna do one Maccabees here. It's in the town of Natural Dam, and this is Natural Dam itself. This is all naturally built. When we were kids, we used to come out here and rope swing. There's a old rope swing, and people used to climb up this tree, and some would just jump off the top of the tree. It's fairly deep out there, and you can float around, but it's a beautiful day, and we're going to go over near where the grist mill was at to do our little video on one Maccabees. Now I have a website, www.arkansaswaterfall.com, which has the dam when it was really high, and it was actually even making another waterfall across that road. Always look under the rocks for snakes. Now one Maccabees, there's one Maccabees, 2 Maccabees, and 3 Maccabees. They're one of the most historically accurate books in the Bible, even though one Maccabees isn't in a lot of Bibles. It's in the Roman Catholic Church Bible, when the Greeks translated everything with the New Testament. It was in that Bible, but with their Old Testament, it's called the Septuagint or something like that. It's in the Orthodox Bible and a few other Bibles one Maccabees is in, but it was taken out and not included in a lot of Bibles. And the reason that is because the Maccabees, also known as the Hasmonean Dynasty, the Maccabees became the high priest and the king. First off, the high priest is supposed to be from the lineage of Aaron, Moses' brother. Secondly, the king is supposed to be from the lineage of King David. And the Maccabees, I believe, were 9, but they were voted in to run these positions, some by the kings of the Seluced Kingdom, mainly Syria area and Judea. Those kings gave them this position, but a lot of the Jewish don't accept that, although they did rededicate the temple, and this is where Hanukkah comes from. So the Jews do recognize that rededication by the Maccabees. Though they don't have one Maccabees in the Bible, they probably use it as a study guide, but not as a worship book. A lot of the apocryphal books, although not in the Bible, are considered good for study. It's not included for worship. A lot of them were inspired. That's why I do this website, Christopher's Christian Study Cast, is on apocryphal books, because they are good for study. And as I said before, one Maccabees is the most historically accurate book there is. Alright, I decided to sit a little closer because of the waterfall is drowning out the sound a little. One Maccabees is a history of the rebellion of the Jews against their Syrian rulers, the Seleucid Empire. Before then, you had Alexander the Great, who took over a large area, and he was in Judea, or Judah, and then it was switched to Judea, but he allowed Israel to keep their religions and keep their ways. He had a good relationship with Israel. Well, after Alexander the Great passed away, his kingdom was split up, and the Seleucid took over the Syrian area and Israel. They allowed Israel to keep their ways until we got to King Antiochus, or Antiochus IV, depending on how you pronounce it. I like Antiochus IV. And then he wanted to make Hellenistic ways for all his kingdom, and this included Israel. He wanted Israel to conform to Greek culture, to start worshiping Greek gods and showing tribute to the Greek god and sacrificing to the Greek gods. During this rebellion, the main hero of the story is Judas Maccabees. He was the one that was given the name Maccabees, which means the hammer, and he led most of the rebellion, early rebellion. From his success came the Hasmonean rule of Judea. And this was the rule there for a century before the arrival of Herod the Great. This map shows the battles during the Maccabean revolt. Brown diamond is Jerusalem. Black circle sites are battles with the Seleucid forces. The green triangle sites against outlying non-Judean towns, especially during the 163 BC campaign. The rough area of the Maccabean influence is in tan. The capital diamond Jerusalem and Acra, a military stronghold of the Seleucid, which controlled Jerusalem and the temple, seeing who goes in and out of Jerusalem. Now the initial battle was at Modin. Started in 167 BC at Modin, called the Modin Revolt. Now this revolt was led by Mattathias. He was the father of the sons of the Maccabeans. And Mattathias was a country priest in Modin. He was told by the Seleucids to sacrifice an animal on the altar for their gods, and he was against that. He wasn't going to do that, and anybody that tried to do that, he was going to kill them. Well, the story goes that one of the priests or Jewish people there said that he would do it, and Mattathias stabbed him, killed him dead. So Mattathias then formed his Jewish army to defeat the Seleucids. His passing was in 166 BC, and then he passed the torch to his son, Judah, who received the name Maccabean, which means the hammer. So he's called Judas Maccabees. Judas Maccabees was the leader of Matthias' 5 sons. Now when Seron, the prince of the army of Syria, heard say that Judas had gathered unto him a multitude and company of the faithful to go out with him to war, he said, I will get me a name and honor in the kingdom, for I will go fight with Judas and them that are with him who despise the king's commandments. And this is in 1 Maccabees 3, 13 through 14. And in 1 Maccabees 17 through 19, in chapter 3, Judas' men said, how shall we be able, being so few, to fight against so great a multitude, and so strong, seeing we are ready to faint with fasting all day? Judas replied, it is no hard matter for many to be shut up in the hands of a few. With the God of heaven, it is all one to deliver a great multitude or a small company. For victory of battle standeth not in a multitude of a host meaning army, so not in the multitude of an army, but strength cometh from heaven. So in 1 Maccabees 3, 27 through 28, King Antiochus heard these things and raised a very strong army, opening his treasury and paying his soldiers for a year wages, commanding them to be ready whensoever he should need them. So he was paying them even while they were on furlough. Well, in 1 Maccabees 3, 58 through 60, Judas told his forces to arm themselves, be valiant men, be ready against the morning, that ye fight these nations that assemble together against us to destroy us and our sanctuary. For it is better to die in battle than to behold the calamities of our people and our sanctuary. Nevertheless, as the will of God is in heaven, so let him do. There's a little Granddaddy Longlegs showed up. This is the Granddaddy Longlegs production with the grace of God. Granddaddy Longlegs came to visit us. Mindful of the superiority of the Seleucid forces during the first 2 years of the revolt. Judah's strategy was to avoid any engagement with regular army and resorted to guerrilla warfare for security, enabling Judah to win a string of victories from 167 to 164. Judah drove out his foes from the upper city of Jerusalem, except for the Acra, A-C-R-A, basically a citadel that we talked about earlier, and that was in the southern part, outside the wall. So the Acra was a fortified stronghold built by Seluced King Antiochus IV in 168 BC to monitor Jewish temple activity and control access to the temple. While Judas captured the upper city of Jerusalem in 164 and rededicating the temple, where we had the celebration of Hanukkah, the Acra was not destroyed until 141 BC by Simon, and we'll get into that later. And the Acra, they could not find that for a long period of time, and it baffled them because they knew that 1 Maccabees was very historically correct. But they finally unearthed it in 2015 AD, which was about 10 years ago. And they found arrowheads, slingshot, balls, all kinds of stuff with the kings of the Seleucid army back in those days. In that first little section there, I was quoting from 1 Maccabees to let you know how the read is. And it's a very historical and accurate type writing. Now, with the Roman Republic showing interest in Eastern Mediterranean, Judah signed the first treaty with them in 161 BC to help quell any Seleucid revenge on the Maccabean army. This was the first recorded contract between Jewish people and the Romans. The Roman-Jewish treaty did not affect, however, the Seleucid king Demetrius policy, who launched another attack. Now, they're pretty much, we don't care what you sign with the Romans. In the Battle of Elaza, Judah and those who remained faithful were killed in that battle. The death of Judah Maccabee in 160 BC stirred the Jews to renewed resistance. As a warrior, hero, and national liberator, Judas Maccabee has inspired many writers, artists, and composers. Jonathan Maccabee was chosen as the new leader. But before we talk about Jonathan, let's step back a bit to 162 BC. This would be 2 years prior, and talk about the fourth brother, Eleazar. Eleazar of Iran, which means the piercer. Little is known about Eleazar, except his heroic death. According to the scrolls of Antiochus, his father, Mattathias, saw him as a zealot. According to 1 Maccabees 6, 43 through 46, so that'd be 1 Maccabees chapter 6. In 162, during the battle of Beth Zechariah, Eleazar identified a war elephant that he believed was carrying the Seleucid king, Antiochus IV. Due to special armor of the elephant that he wore, he decided to attack the elephant in spite of the danger by thrusting a spear in its belly. The elephant died and collapsed upon Eleazar and killed him, earning him the name Eleazar the Piercer. Streets are named for him in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. The elephant was actually carrying Antiochus V, who survived, and he was just a little child at the time. Also, Eleazar killed many Felixes to get to the elephant. He was just going crazy, and then he got to the elephant, stabbed him, the elephant fell on him. Now we're back to 160 BC when Jonathan took over. Now this kind of coincides with Jonathan. There was another child named John. He went by the name, or was given the name John Gotti, not to be confused with the Gotti up in Chicago. But in 160, John Gotti, which means fortune, gain of produce, many have thought he might be a farmer. He was the first and the oldest brother of Mattathias. His actions are less detailed in the records than even Elijah. John was on a mission for his brother Jonathan, who had taken over as leader. John and his party were attempting to arrange for the Nabatean to store provisions for the Jewish rebels. John was killed in an ambush by residents of the Medeba, modern-day Jordan. Medeba, it's about 55 miles from Jerusalem. It was over the Jordan River. Jonathan and his party and John and Simon were all pushed across that river. John's death ultimately led to retaliation from the Maccabees against Medeba, Jordan. His contributions is honored as part of the broader struggle pressures Jewish faith and freedom against Hellenization, Greek culture. Now, after Judas died, Jonathan was elected as leader of the rebellion, and he was Jonathan Athos, meaning the disassembler. He was the youngest of the brothers, leader of the Maccabean revolt from 160 to 143 BC. Jonathan noticed that Bacchides, a general of the Seleucid Empire, was trying to entrap him. Jonathan, with his brothers Simon and John and their followers, retired to a desert region east of the Jordan River in a boggy area around an ancient pool called Asphar. This would explain why John was sent east to the Nabateans to store goods for their rebels. But that area was more Hellenized, and they didn't agree with a lot of the revolt that the Maccabees were doing. Bacchides decided to attack them on Shabbat, the Sabbath day. Jonathan would not fight, is what he thought, because they're not supposed to fight on the Sabbath. Jonathan urged the men to fight for their lives. Bacchides took heavy loss. Jonathan understood the need for self-preservation outweighed the prohibition to not fight on the Sabbath. Jesus taught this same thing. Remember when they were walking and picking grain to eat on the Sabbath day, and the Jews accused him of breaking the Sabbath? He understood that in necessity it is okay. They're not bound by these laws. And also when he was healing the sick. Jonathan, after pushing Bacchides back, offers a peace treaty in exchange for prisoners of war. Bacchides readily consented and even took an oath to never more making war upon Jonathan. Bacchides and his forces vacated Judea. After the victories, Jonathan took up residency in Michmash, and that is about 7 miles from Jerusalem. From there, he endeavored to clear the land of the godless and apostates. During this time, Alchemius was the high priest from 162 to 159 BC. 3 years until his death, he opposed the Maccabean revolt. He was against the revolt and had a moderate Hellenistic adoption. He was made high priest after Menelaus, the high priest from 172 to 163, was executed. So this is when the Seleucid Empire, which was basically one, kind of split, because by Regent Lysias as Antiochus V, who was around 8 to 10 years old, governs for the Seleucid Kingdom to the west. The Seleucid Kingdom run by Antiochus IV until 164, and he died of sickness. Antiochus V ruled from 164 to 162. Antiochus V was put to death by Demetrius I, 162 to 150. Alexander Ballas claimed the throne in 153, so you had two kings there. Because although Alexander Ballas claimed the throne in 153, he competed with Demetrius I, who was reigning king. Alexander Ballas appointed Jonathan high priest in 152. So that's how the Maccabees became high priest, through Alexander Ballas. This was during the Feast of the Tabernacles, which is another celebration by the Jews. Really nice celebration. Then Jonathan, in turn, helped Alexander against Demetrius I. And Alexander eventually defeated Demetrius I in 150 BC, solidifying his claim to the throne and reigning from 150 to 145 BC. Demetrius I died by the hands of his own allies as he escaped, and I believe he went to Antioch. With Alexander commissioning Jonathan as high priest in 152, between 158 and 153, there's no record of a high priest in Jerusalem or in Judea, though Jonathan may have fulfilled these duties in lieu of this. And that may be why Alexander went ahead and gave him the title. This is only assumed, but it's improbable that there was no high priest during this time. This would be like for 5 years. Jonathan ended up dying in 143 BC after being lured into a trap. He was killed by Diototus Tryphon, who was regent and later king of the West Kingdom. This was after claiming Antiochus VI of Alexander was the rightful heir. We had again a split in the Seleucid Kingdom. Diototus Tryphon also killed Antiochus VI and assumed kingship and Demetrius II, king of the Eastern Kingdom, Maccabeans supported Dietus Tryphon, and they had a good relation. And then Dietus came for a meeting, and he killed Maccabean and his forces that were with him there. It's when Simon Maccabean took over and switched support to Demetrius II. Trypho then tried to take over Jerusalem in 142 BC. Simon and his army forced them out in 138. Antiochus VII took reign of the east, defeating Tryphon of the west, who then committed suicide. Tryphon committed suicide. But Antiochus VII never really took full control of the west to restore the Seluced Kingdom back to its glory days of Alexander Balak and the previous kings. So Simon was a leader from 142 to 135 BC. And Simon was known as Simon Theses, or Simon Thesi, meaning the wise. And he was the second son of Mattathias. And he was elected leader in Jerusalem after Jonathan's death and forced Tryphon out of Judea in 142 BC, finally capturing the Acre citadel in 141 BC. So then they had full control over Jerusalem. And this is when the Hasmonean Dynasty was founded by a resolution adopted in 1941 at a large assembly of the priests and the people and the elders of the land, to the effect that Simon would be their leader and high priest forever, until there should arise a faithful prophet, recognized by the Roman Republic, was accorded by the Senate in 139 BC, when the delegates representing Simon were in Rome. Simon would go on to become the most popular male name for 3 centuries afterwards in both the Hasmonean Kingdom and Roman Judea, to honor a Jewish hero. And it was not a strange name to Greek ears also, so it was very popular to use Simon as a name. The Greeks understood it as well as the Jews and the Romans. Simon ended up becoming assassinated by his son-in-law, Ptolemy, in 135 BC. Now this was during a banquet in Dope near Jericho. Ptolemy was the military commander of the area, invited Simon and his sons. Then had Simon and his sons, Mattathias and Judah were their names, murdered. John, another of his sons, as you can see, he was naming his sons after his brothers and father. John, another of his sons, did not attend. So he survived, and he became the next high priest in 134 to 104 BC. John Hyrcanus became leader of the Hasmonean Dynasty after the death of Antiochus VII in 129 BC. And then he ended up dying of natural causes. Was succeeded by John Aristobulus I, becoming high priest and first Hasmonean king of Judea in 104 BC. And this lasted for 1 year. He imprisoned his mother and brother, with one brother, Jonathan, being the only one to survive. Jonathan, known as Alexander Janasius, was high priest from 103 BC to 76 BC, and he died of malaria. He was able to extend the territories of Judea. After his death, power went to his wife until her death in 67 BC. Hyrcanus II, she became high priest in 73 and soon took over king in 67 BC after Alexander's wife passed. So he became high priest and king in 67. Aristobulus II overthrew him in 66 to 63, and he became high priest and king. And this was a lot of family feuding between the Maccabeans lineage. This civil war caused Rome to intervene, leading Judea to become a tributary state by Rome, by General Pompey in 63 BC. They were like, man, this thing going back and forth, they don't know what they're doing, so they kind of stepped in. Aristobulus was taken prisoner. Hyrcanus became the high priest from 63 to 40, and ruler from 47 to 40. Then his ears were cut off by his great nephew Antigonus II, so he could not be high priest because he didn't have his ears. And this was from 40 to 37 BC. Well, Antigonus II became a puppet under Mark Antony. And 37 BC was the end of the Hasmonean Dynasty, and Herod the Great became the king of Judea. And that basically is the history of 1 Maccabees that was just kind of an overview, and there was a lot of changes in kings on the Seleucid side, and a lot of change of kings and high priests on the Judean side and the Hasmonean kingdom. And it's a very interesting read and very informative historically if you want to know about the kings of the time. There was a lot going on. One of the most interesting battles, and a very interesting family in the Maccabees, and they did a lot for Israel. Although they were left out of the Bible, as we said, king and high priest were pretty much given to them by the Seleucid kingdom and also by the Romans. The Jews themselves didn't believe that to be the way that God intended, so they left that out of the Bible. But they did a lot for Israel, and as we saw, that was until 37 BC, and then we'll have about 30 years later, that's when Jesus is born, and Herod's like, well, hold on now, we're gonna have to kill, and that's when that all started up. But it's a very interesting read, and we took a long time, about a year, getting all this information. We even studied the 12 minor prophets, and we got to the time frame of about 444 BC with that. And so this is very interesting because Alexander the Great, you know, passed away in 330 area BC, and then we pick up here with the Maccabean revolt in 167. Brings us all the way to 37 when the Romans took over, and so it just shows how the Romans came to be about in that area and how the Jews were under their thumb because the Maccabees, the Hasmonean Dynasty, was taken away by Mark Antony and Herod the Great. Well, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoyed the fall views. We'll probably do New Testament Apocryphal next. So far we have Tobit, the Apocalypse of Peter, and now we have one Maccabees. So stay tuned, we should have something good coming up. All right, peace. Woo! That's Dam, check it out.